Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you very much for joining us today. We are happy to bring to you 16th webinar of Energy Evaluation Asia Pacific. My name is Nazir. I'm your host for today's webinar and a coordinator with Energy Evaluation Asia Pacific, which is a dynamic community of energy and evaluation professionals across the Asia Pacific region. Before we dive into the webinar, I would like to inform you that this session is being recorded. I would also like to invite you to kindly introduce yourself in the chat, sharing your name, your country, and your organization. And also in one word, what comes to your mind when we think about energy evaluation. While you are doing that, I would like to quickly share with you some housekeeping rules. First of all, as I shared, this session is being recorded, and we assume that by attending and participating, you give your consent for this to happen. Please keep your microphones muted when you are not speaking, but you can switch on your cameras for better engagement. Feel free to put your questions in the chat. The speakers will respond to the questions at the end, where we will have a dedicated Q&A session, or they may also directly respond in the chat box. We will be sharing with you a feedback form at the end of the session, so please share your feedback. Also sharing with us your expectation for the future sessions. This session will be uploaded on our YouTube channel as well as in our website, and we will be sharing the session recording along with the discussion notes with you through emails and as well as through our website. Today's webinar's agenda looks like this. We'll start with an opening remarks and an overview of the context from Edward Wine, who is member of Steering Committee Energy Evaluation Asia Pacific. Then we will have presentations and discussions from our keynote speakers, Renee Stephens and Nicholas Howarth. That will be followed by a dedicated Q&A session. So without further ado, I will invite Edward Wine for welcome remarks and providing an overview of the context. Ed, over to you.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here for our webinar this month. And as you'll hear from me later, we have some others scheduled later in the year. I'm going to share my slides. So I just wanted to briefly talk about Energy Evaluation Asia Pacific. Many of you on this webinar have heard me talk, but for those who haven't, it's a not-for-profit established in 2018. Actually, it's now been about 10 years since the genesis. We had a webinar in Beijing, not a webinar, we had a workshop. Remember those days? A workshop in Beijing, October 2015. Our organization is modeled after the one in the US that I helped work on since 1983. And then we also created one for Europe. Energy Evaluation Europe is what it's called now, and that's been since 2010. The one in the US is held on the odd years every 2 years, and the one in Europe is held every 2 years on the even years. We support evaluation of energy policy and programs in the Asia Pacific region, from Pakistan to New Zealand and countries in between. And our mission is to take a leadership role in expanding the practice of and capacity for objective evaluation of energy efficiency and renewable energy programs and policies. And how do we do this? Well, we try to bring people together through various mechanisms, such as this webinar. And we've had a conference. We hope to have another conference, which I'll mention briefly. And we have a lot of resources on our website. So I hope everyone can go to our website after this talk and find out what's available to you regarding our steering committee, advisory committee, and resources, particularly in the educational system for evaluation. As I mentioned, we do organize conference, and we're hoping to have one in July in Indonesia. It's still being in the works, as it were. It hasn't been finalized, but once it is finalized, we'll let people know, and they can hopefully come and present about evaluation. And we do have a webinar that'll be held next month, and a few more that are almost being finalized. And then for this webinar, we do have a feedback form, and we'd like you to complete that after the webinar, and Nazir will be talking about that later. And then finally, I just want to introduce the speakers, Renee Stevens from the International Energy Agency, and she's going to be talking about the IEA's 2024 Energy Efficiency Report. And then Nick Howarth, again from the IEA, will talk about the Energy Efficiency Progress Tracker. They go hand in hand. So we'll first start with Renee, and then after she's finished, we'll then go to Nick. And then after that, we'll have questions for you, questions for them from you as well as from myself. But we have this chat function, so you can ask your questions through chat, or we can open it up and you can talk then. So Renee is, as I mentioned, a policy analyst at the IEA with her focus on Southeast Asia. And before joining IEA, Renee worked in the public sector on both energy efficiency and climate change policy, and supported the implementation of climate change initiatives in the Asia Pacific region. So Renee, I'll let you start with your slides. You can start sharing your slides and then start.
Fantastic. All right, apologies for that, folks. I'll jump right in because I know we're all desperate to hear about the fantastic insights in the Energy Efficiency 2024 report. So without further ado, before we jump into the insights from the report itself, I thought I'd give a little context on what this report is and the background behind it. So the IEA has published an energy efficiency report every year since 2016, and the 2024 report is the 8th edition. And so these reports are the IEA's primary annual analysis on global energy efficiency developments. And they show recent trends in energy intensity and demand, prices and policies. And the 2024 edition was published in November 2024. So that's a year on from the COP28 summit of late 2023. And at COP28, nearly 200 countries had reached a landmark agreement to work together to collectively double the global average annual rate of energy efficiency improvements by 2030. So the Energy Efficiency 2024 report asks the question, a year on from this historic agreement, is the world on track to achieve it? So before we dive into the numbers and insights, I'll also take a moment to point out that the highest level way the report describes energy efficiency progress is using the concept of energy intensity. And this term will be used at different points throughout the presentation. So to measure global energy efficiency progress, we can consider the change in the energy intensity of the global economy. If the amount of the energy used to create the same economic output is decreasing, then that's indicating the world is becoming more efficient and less energy intense. And so energy intensity change is driven by two factors, by the GDP and energy demand. So to understand the trends in efficiency this year, we'll first turn our attention to looking at energy demand. So after several shocks to the energy system, due firstly to the COVID-19 pandemic and then to the global energy crisis, We observed for 2023 a growth in energy demand of about 1.7%. And we saw demand in industry, that's shown there in the light blue, in particular recover from 2022. And the IEA estimated that for 2024, energy demand was set to grow at a rate of around 2%. And these estimates will be updated this year. We estimated that industry demand was strong as pressures from the energy crisis eased. And energy demand is driven by different forces. So on the one hand, you have structural and activity effects that are pushing demand upwards, such as more people getting access to energy, and especially in advanced economies, using more energy, living in bigger houses, driving more cars. And then on the other hand, you have efficiency trying to temper the demand. So the balance between these forces is determining the overall energy demand growth, and that's an important factor in efficiency progress. We can clearly see these forces at play when looking at demand for cooling and the effect of electricity consumption. So we've analysed peak electricity demand at different temperature levels, and we can see higher electricity demand at higher temperatures. This is when air conditioners are most often turned on and working the hardest. So in the past years, we're seeing that the electricity demand peaks have shifted upwards, especially at high temperatures. 2023 saw record temperatures globally, and 2024 was on track to beat that. So how about in the Asia Pacific? Well, the Energy Efficiency 2024 report points out that nearly 80% of countries in the Asia Pacific reached new all-time electricity peak demand records or suffered major disruptions attributed to extreme heat events. As we know, heat waves and extreme temperatures are driving the demand for much needed cooling technologies such as air conditioners. So perhaps unsurprisingly, sales of air conditioners rose in many places in 2024. Improving the energy efficiency level of air conditioners can mitigate some of these upward shifts in electricity demand and abate the strain that we're seeing being placed on grids. An important factor that's affecting global progress is how much money is flowing to efficiency, the level of investment. And this includes businesses buying more efficient motors or governments spending on new subsidies. But most investments in efficiency come directly from people at home, such as through insulating their house or buying efficient heat pumps or switching to more efficient devices. After significant growth from 2019 to 2022, we've seen efficiency investments stagnating slightly since then. 2024 was expected to see relatively weak growth as well. As with most clean energy investments, global end-use energy investment is still heavily centralised in North America, Europe, and China. However, for the People's Republic of China and the broader Asia-Pacific region, the IEA estimates saw that energy investments increased by almost 10% in 2024. So the region was leading the pack to an extent when it came to efficiency-related investment. So now that we've seen some of the factors that were driving both energy demand and efficiency progress in 2024, let's see how these forces came together to determine overall efficiency progress. So in 2024, the IEA estimated slow global progress on energy efficiency of around 1%. This is similar to the rate of progress in 2023, and it's significantly lower than the required level in the COP28 target to double global energy efficiency progress by 2030. So as a result, the world isn't yet currently on track to achieve its ambition with regards to energy efficiency. But in the past decade, many countries have reached higher efficiency improvements. In fact, 9 out of 10 countries achieved a rate of 4% at least once. So it's possible, but policy implementation needs ramping up if we're to reach those levels again and to sustain them. So now that we've seen the global ambition and where recent progress has brought us, it's good to remind ourselves of what's at stake. What would the world get from accelerating a shift from ambition to action? One example of what it gets us is illustrated here. The implementation of the COP28 energy goals in full and on time could reduce global oil demand by almost 24 million barrels per day by 2030 compared to the IEA stated policy scenario. So to put this into perspective, global oil demand was about 100 million barrels per day in 2023. So 2/3 of this reduction is driven by measures relating to doubling energy efficiency. So such as technical efficiency and electrification also. So energy efficiency is definitely crucial for the transition away from fossil fuels. Strong energy efficiency policies are essential to deliver on climate goals and to move from ambition to action. At global, regional and national levels, swift policy action is needed to reach our target, double progress on energy efficiency, and we know it can be done. As mentioned, most countries have reached the level of 4% at least once since 2019, and there is the opportunity and potential to do that again. And the question is how. So the IEA, we don't just track energy intensity progress and energy use, but we also track energy efficiency policy progress. So where the policies are in place, what they cover, and what proportion of energy consumption is covered as well. And through this tracking, we've seen the progress in energy efficiency that's due to policy action, with coverage of policies increasing across all sectors and regions. I thought I'd share with you this example from the Energy Efficiency Market Report, which is about the coverage of building energy codes. So building energy codes, they're an example of an important policy measure for achieving energy efficiency progress, and they provide other benefits like comfort and savings. So the report presents information on the IEA's new Building Energy Code Content Assessment Tool. We have a snazzy acronym for it called the Becker tool. And so this tool collects and evaluates the available elements of a country's buildings regulation. And it offers the opportunity to assess the potential areas for improvement. So this is an example of an energy evaluation tool that the IEA is using here. And it considers 10 elements of importance for a comprehensive building energy code for the transition to zero carbon ready buildings. This diagram is a simple to understand representation of building code coverage in various countries and the potential opportunities. And one finding from this evaluation was that smart solutions are less often integrated in building codes. So there's an opportunity that more countries could be exploring in the future on that front. So I encourage you to take a look at the report to see that one. That's on page 42. So now let's turn to considering what new policies were enacted in 2024. So just a few snapshots here. Vietnam approved its 8th Power Development Plan, which will amend the law on using energy efficiency and conservation to accelerate efficiency progress. It'll achieve this by introducing more stringent METs, developing energy management models for high-consuming sectors, designing a framework for energy service companies, and mobilising investment in more energy-efficient equipment, especially in Vietnam's industrial sector. In Australia and also in Chile, there were new standards for vehicles introduced. In Indonesia and South Africa, new policies were enacted targeting industrial motors. The policies will eliminate the most inefficient models from the market. And in India, the policy approach is through a motors replacement scheme, but South Africa took a different policy approach through increasing the MEPs for new motors. So these examples and many others in the report demonstrate potential for increased coverage across all sectors and regions and highlight the many and varied opportunities for policymakers to be leveraging. But while increasing policy coverage plays an important role in achieving our energy and climate goals, strengthening and increasing the quality of policies is also vital to move quickly from ambition to action. Sorry, I think I've flipped ahead there. So examples of some strengthened policies in 2024, to name a few. So Indonesia's Just Energy Transition Partnership was launched in November 2022, but in 24, its Energy Efficiency and Electrification Working Group was launched. The JETP's Comprehensive Investment and Policy Plan is an example of an energy evaluation report that has a national focus. So also in 2024, Indonesia also worked with the IEA on investigating fuel economy standards. China issued a plan that includes a target to improve national energy intensity by 2.5% for 2024 with a focus on large-scale industries. And in India, the government strengthened its building energy codes that apply to homes and commercial buildings. And those updates provide the policy signal for states for stronger compliance. All right,
Renee,
so
you have a few minutes left.
Okay, no problem. I will hit the highlights. So I think we'll just jump on into just a few regional highlights. So in China, we saw that there was significant progress made on energy efficiency since 2010. So achieving an annual energy intensity improvement at least 4% on 4 occasions between 2011 and 2023. Between 2011 and 2016, China achieved an average energy intensity improvement of more than 4%, and the annual figure peaked in 2016 at 7%. So I think in the interest of time, I might jump ahead a little bit here to this slide. Still in China, we saw that the industrial energy demand, which is shown in grey here, has almost quadrupled since the beginning of the century, from around 12,000 petajoules in the year 2000 to about 46,000 petajoules in 2022. However, without the effects of energy efficiency, demand would have been more than 50% higher in 2022 at around 73,000 petajoules. And an important driver of this change here is the phase out of coal use in industry, driven by policies to prevent air pollution and to save energy. So on to India. I think, again, in the interest of time, I'll just skip to this slide here. So this one, here we're talking about the adoption of electric vehicles in India, which is an important element of energy efficiency improvements in their economy. And tracking data on the sale of electric vehicles is important for evaluating the role and effectiveness of policies to support EV uptake. India is aiming for 30% of all vehicle sales to be electric by 2030. And electric vehicle uptake in India is being led by the 2- and 3-wheeler market segment. And its FAME scheme provided subsidies on the purchase price of electric buses and 2-, 3-, and 4-wheelers. So phase 1 ran from 2015 to 2019, and phase 2 ran from 2019 to March 2024. And the Energy Efficiency Report points out some data on the effects of the FAME scheme. So in the past 3 years, sale of electric two-wheelers increased 5-fold, and sales of electric three-wheelers tripled. And a month before the FAME 2 scheme closed, there was a marked 40% increase observed in EV sales in India. And its successor ran from April to September in 2024. That was the Electric Mobility Promotion Scheme. And the subsidies offered under the new scheme were lower, and so too were sales. So they were about 10% lower in the first couple of months of the new scheme compared to the last February of the old scheme. So this is an example here where the tracking of vehicle sales was important for considering the effects of EV policy incentives in India. But overall, the policy significantly helped to support the deployment of EVs, particularly in two-wheeler and three-wheeler market segments that comprise more than 80% in total of EV sales in India. So I'll skip ahead here because there's lots to share, but in the interest of giving Nick time and space for his presentation, I'll just point out 2 quick things for the audience, which is that the IEA, is part of what we do here is really sharing a lot of insights and knowledge and accelerating progress on energy efficiency around the world. And here's a couple of events I'd like to highlight. If you'd like to know more either about the annual global conference or the policy training week that we have coming up this year, you can visit our website that's shown there on the screen. And the last thing to mention, again, before handing over, is very excitingly, we have opened our first regional cooperation centre based out of Singapore. And so we look forward to being able to expand our impact and collaborations in the region through our new presence there out of Singapore. And with that, I'll pass it on to Nick.
Thank you, Renee. That's great. Nick, your slides are already up, correct? Part 2?
That's right. Renee's done the hard work of loading them up, so I might just ask her to continue moving forward with them.
Yeah. I'll just introduce you quickly. Nick is an energy economist at the IEA, specializing in climate change and energy efficiency. And his work has directly contributed to decision-making processes at high-level forums such as the G20 and the United Nations. And he has had extensive experience advising governments and businesses across various countries, including Australia, the UK, Saudi Arabia, China, and Europe. So without further ado, and for timing, we will proceed with Nick, and then we'll have some time left over for questions. And as I mentioned in the chat function, you can add questions there as well, rather than wait. So Nick, please proceed.
Great. Well, great to be here, and thanks for having us. I think this is a fantastic community and plays a very key role in informing policymakers around the world. So moving forward, with the next slide. One of the reasons why building this energy evidence base up is to, of course, inform policy at different levels. And what we saw in 2 years ago at COP28 was really the highest profile for energy efficiency at an international forum like this in the final declaration which was issued. And many of you will probably know this already. The commitment as part of the first global stocktake that was taken by all countries to triple renewable energy capacity globally and double the global average rate of energy efficiency improvements by 2030 as key to transitioning away from fossil fuels in the energy system. So this, of course, automatically raises a whole bunch of really critical questions for energy evaluation communities, like how do we measure this? How do we go from global targets to national strategies and plans? And so just moving forward to next slide. But just quickly staying at the global level, what we see is that if we look at the capacity expected to be brought online in the next decade, renewable energies is very much within striking distance of this global target. However, energy efficiency progress, as Renee pointed out, is moving at a much slower pace and is quite a way off this, what would be required by doubling. And at the IEA, we look at this in terms of the energy intensity, primary energy intensity of the global economy, which would involve improving from an average rate of around 2% per year to 4%. So if we move forward to, you saw in the market report some of the detail around what's involved in that, but we've broken this down by different policy measures. And of course, the measures are similar across all economies, but the weighting will differ according to individual national circumstances, and can be broken down by pure technical and material efficiency, electrification and renewables, which relates to fuel switching, both the end use and in the generation side, as well as a whole range of behavioral and infrastructure-enabled shifts, say, for instance, moving to more public transport could be an example here. So that gives you a bit more of a sense of what's involved. So we move forward to the tracker. So to help countries understand, first of all, how are we going towards tracking the doubling goal? How does it relate to my country's or region's level of energy efficiency progress? And what might be an appropriate level of progress for my country or region to contribute to this COP28 doubling goal? We launched a new data product which is freely available and accessible for people to download the information within. And this includes information much more detailed across 8 regions and 140 countries, covering energy intensity, both at the primary level and final energy level, as well as the energy demand. We also bring in a very important new metric for tracking efficiency progress, which is electrification progress, as well as tracking those electrification trends. And there's a repository of financing solutions in there as well. And so I might ask Renee just to stop sharing her screen, and I'll just very quickly, in a 5-minute, in 5 minutes, I'll bring up the energy efficiency progress tracker, so you can see exactly what we're talking about here. So when we go in, and I might just to give a quick overview of the global trends. And so this runs in parallel to the market report, that you can see primary energy intensity as well as total energy supply. So that's the primary energy demand across historical period from 2010 to 2019 in terms of the annual average, and then some scenarios moving out for the rest of the decade, as well as the latest year, which was last year, 2024. So this really is the most up-to-date, most current view of energy intensity and energy demand that exists on the market. So the final indicator is electrification progress and electricity consumption. I'd be interested in views from this group. This is a new indicator. We look at the change in the overall share of electricity in total final consumption to get an indicator of the direction of how quickly the shift towards electricity is going. And if we look at the regions, we can dive in exactly to look at the Asia Pacific, which is pertinent to this group. And I think the first key takeaway is that this region has huge ability to influence global progress because it's the largest region, encompassing over half of all global primary energy demand. There's 24 countries covered in the tracker, as well as main groupings. You can see the dynamics of how quickly individual countries are going in terms of their rate of progress, but also what their level of energy intensity is. Like, for instance, in China, it's got the fastest growing improvement of all countries in the region, around 4%, which is that global level that's needed for doubling. But it requires twice as much energy to produce the same GDP as, say, Japan, which has a slightly slower rate of improvement, but is much, much more efficient. And so you can look at these for all these different countries in the region, and then the specific up to the moment information on the region as a whole. And here we see total primary, this is the energy intensity specific to the Asia Pacific region. And what the key takeaway here is that historically this region led global progress. It had the fastest rate of improvement historically overall, but in the last, since COVID, this has dropped from around 2.5% per year improvement in the past to just under 1% improvement per year since 2021. And that's being driven by this acceleration in energy demand across the region. So we've gone from historical growth around 2.5% to around 3.5%. And so this is very strong when you compare it to the global average growth historic at around 1.8%, and since COVID around 2% annually. So it's running, energy demand is moving much faster. The other key takeaway from this story that I'd like to highlight to you is the electrification story for the Asia Pacific region. And here it's really a situation where the Asia Pacific is the global star. The region already has one of the highest shares of electricity in final energy demand, just over 26%. And this has moved up fast since last decade, where it was less than 20%, and is really leading the world in terms of the transition towards a greater use of electricity across end users. And of course, that's driving very fast electricity demand growth, but efficiency is playing a key role in also tapering, moderating that fast demand growth. So I might leave it there in terms of the taste of what's in the tracker, and open it up back to the chair and to questions.
Very good. Yes, we'll open it up now. Do people, I'll have to look at the chat too, see if there's some, okay. Okay, I'll start. Of course, this is an evaluation webinar. And so what are the role of evaluators? And let's sort of focus on IEA and how is IEA going to evaluate what's going on. You have the overall picture of what's going on over time, but in terms of details, what programs work, what don't work, what doesn't work, how they can be improved. Is IEA Have they assigned any people to ask those questions as part of your team effort? I see it as sort of a collaboration with the policy, tracking progress, and then, okay, so how do we know what works and what doesn't? I'll start with Nick, and then Renee, you can chime in. Nick, you're on mute right now.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. We've got two computers running here, so I think that helps. So, yeah, for sure. I think in terms of looking across the world around all geographies and seeing what works in terms of policy, and then telling those stories so that other countries can learn from them. We have a huge program that tracks this across both the work we do in energy efficiency, but also energy more broadly. And I draw your attention to the Policy and Measures database, which is a catalog of all of these different policies from around the world. And in our different reports, this is, of course, something that we look at in terms of the highlighting. Now, I think one of the real tough questions, and that I think countries grapple with, we grapple with, is how do you go from, say, the evaluation of a specific policy in a specific sector, it could be buildings, a building code that comes in, to change the actual direction of energy demand in that sector, or overall energy demand for that region. And the mapping of policies onto overall indicators is it's an area that there's, I think, a lot of need for more evidence, because the links aren't always direct. There's a lot of other things that are going on that are influencing the dynamics. And it can also take a long time for policies, efficiency policies, to have an effect. You bring in a code or a new standard, it starts to change the stock slowly with each new building or appliance built or purchased. And that can take 10 years before you start to really see the impacts of that policy. So it's a big area, and it's one we look at, but it's also one, I think, particularly in the context of this doubling story and what's required to lift the intensity, the link between the big indicators and the policies is an area that needs a lot more attention.
Okay. Renee, did you want to chime in, or should we go to the next?
Well, I wouldn't have too much more to say, I think, than what Nick's covered just there with regards to the report and the tracking side of things. But I think I would also just mention and add that a lot of what the IEA does is working with countries and delivering training and bringing countries together to exchange dialogue and to learn from each other about what works and what doesn't. So yeah, it's good food for thought, I think, in terms of like capturing that kind of knowledge and sharing that. Yeah, so thanks. It's a thoughtful question.
Here's again a question for both of you from the audience. What's blocking improvement in energy efficiency in the region? And is there certain countries doing a better job than others? I'll start with Nick.
Well, if I could perhaps hand to our regional, sorry, but I would make the remark that definitely, institutional capacity is always a big issue. Different countries are at different levels in terms of setting up their efficiency agencies, as well as their data capacities. If we look at the information that we have, what's happening even in specific sectors, not all countries have the coverage even on the data reporting side. And that's really an initial step that when you're in this world of evaluating policy and developing the evidence base, you really need. So beyond the very high level economy-wide indicators, once you go down into the sector and subsector, it can be much harder to get clear vision. That's one of the things I would say that holds back.
Renee, do you have anything?
Yeah, I would echo what Nick just said. I think it is very true that one of the difficulties I think governments have is about the resources that they have for doing the work. There's a lot to be done, and I think the market report demonstrates some of those gaps and where you've got leadership happening in some realms and where there's opportunities there for countries to follow the leaders, I suppose. But there are different contexts that different countries are dealing with also, of course. So one size doesn't necessarily fit all when it comes to this. I think yeah, it's a tricky question and one that could be pulled apart. I think, in different ways, but there definitely is progress, being made. We are seeing each year the progress that's being made, and so I think the overall message of the report is that, achieving the doubling goal is really about implementing a lot of the known solutions. We have the known solutions and the challenges in implementing those. So yeah, I think capacity building, information sharing is really useful. The IEA actually has a policy toolkit resource that's available on our website that gives a really good overview, sector by sector, of the different measures that can be implemented, whether that's regulation, information, or incentives. And so it really highlights the different ways that we can be making progress there. So yeah, I don't think it's for lack of solutions. It's the other things that make implementation difficult. So,
right. Here's another twist on this, which I've been seeing. So I've been working in this field of energy efficiency in particular for over 40 years. And what I've seen over time, and was addressed to me when I was at a conference in the Philippines, in Manila, at lunchtime, sitting across from somebody who builds solar and wind, renewables. I said, why are you involved in energy efficiency? You need more power, we'll supply it. We don't have to worry about energy efficiency. And over time, particularly in the last 5 to 8 years, I've seen this trend to, if people are going to be working, governments, it's easier for them, even though it may be more expensive initially, to invest in renewable energy than commit to energy efficiency. And certain countries do a better job on energy efficiency than others. But do you see that in your work as well? More interest on the renewable side than the energy efficiency side? I'll start with Nick again.
So, as an advocate for efficiency, I think we've made huge gains. And I guess the best evidence of that is looking at that COP declaration, where you had renewable energy and energy efficiency side by side at the same level. Saying that it's very, I think we all know that it's been hard to put efficiency up on the agenda in the past, and it's typically easier to communicate renewable energy to policymakers. But having worked in the field myself as well for well over a decade, I think what we're seeing now in terms of the interest level and the visibility of efficiency has never been higher. So, that's a positive note.
Yeah. Renee, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would add, I think that energy efficiency is definitely gaining interest as well around its demand response angle. And, you know, energy efficiency of whether it's buildings or appliances, and, you know, that intersect with renewables through demand management and through reducing demand. You know, that's a really important intersection. And I think, you know, it's kind of an exciting era, I actually think, in energy efficiency, seeing where, how it meshes together. And we are seeing lots of examples where, you know, at the leading edge, you know, buildings are becoming smart, you know, integrating with grids. There's a lot of opportunity in that space. So that's the other thing I would say, energy efficiency is part of the future.
Okay. I think we have one last question, and then I'm going to hand it over to Nazir. Well, maybe there are two. I'll put it. Where can we find historical data on energy intensity at the country level and at the global level for each year, say 2010 to 2019? I think that should be easy to answer. And then, does IEA consider primary energy intensity or final energy intensity as the more important indicator? Nick, you're nodding. Can you answer both quickly?
Exactly. So I think you can use the tracker directly to get the annual averages. And I would say the annual averages are often, I mean, over the period better than looking at single years, because there's a lot of noise in the year by year data. So that's why we present it in the tracker as an annual average. Saying that, I think we're going to update a year by year full spreadsheet with more data publicly available in June. So hopefully that will be in the next update. But you can download what's already there on the website, which gives you a good base. And final energy intensity or primary energy intensity, I think they're good for different things. And so the primary energy is more comprehensive. It picks up system efficiencies. Say, for instance, we see the shift from coal to renewables can drive a huge efficiency gain across the energy system. But if you're just looking at end users, obviously at the sector level, then final energy intensity is more targeted on what you're interested in. And so that's why we include them both. They're both important. It depends on what your question is.
Great. Thank you. I think that's a good way to conclude. I want to thank both Renee and Nick for the time for presenting what's going on at the IEA level, which is, you know, IEA has, obviously people know it's been based in Paris. So people think, oh, just European, but it is worldwide. And now they have an office in Singapore. And so we'll be seeing more of their activities in the Asia Pacific region. Nazir, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Ed. Thanks everyone for being part of this webinar. Thanks to Renee and Nick for the excellent presentations. I would like to invite you all to kindly share your feedback with us. I have put the link in the chat. We are also anticipating a EEAP conference this year. The theme will be on building an evidence-based path to net zero energy transition and global sustainable development. It will be in July at Jakarta, but we haven't finalized the date yet. But we will put it on our website and as well as on our LinkedIn page once the timeline is finalized. Please follow us on LinkedIn. You know, the LinkedIn page also serves as a page for sharing ideas and discussions. You can also follow our YouTube channel where we have uploaded the previous webinars and we'll also be uploading this one. You can also find presentations from previous conferences there. And on our website, as Ed shared, we have a resources page where we have all the papers, presentations, and webinar recordings from previous webinars and conferences. This all for today. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll hopefully see you next month.
Thank you, Nazir. Have a good day or a good night wherever you are. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.